Welcome to Coming to Life, the Canadian Conservation Institute and a horse-drawn hearse. Project complete. My name is Karen Noble, and I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of Grey Roots Museum and Archives. Thank you for joining us. We wish to begin by respectfully acknowledging that our community gathering place is situated on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires known as the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, and further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, known collectively as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of these lands and waters. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and friendship with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. This talk begins the 2024 Fall Lecture Series, the remainder of which is in person only, taking place in the Thomas Wheeldon Theatre at Grey Roots Museum and Archives on Tuesdays at 1 p.m., November 5th through 19th. These talks are included with admission and free to members. Complimentary refreshments to follow. Next Tuesday, November 5th, join Richard Thomas for the Roots of Grey Roots, a 20 Years of Grey Roots special presentation. On Tuesday, November 12th, host Matt Johnson will connect with historian and author Mark Zulke to discuss the Cinderella Campaign, 1st Canadian Army, and the battles for the Channel ports. And finally, on Tuesday, November 19th, Dave Alexander presents Crusaders Serving the World, Going to War with the Royal Canadian Air Force. Today's talk celebrates the return of the 1930s winterized hearse to Grey Roots after its treatment at the CCI in Ottawa. It is on display in the Grey Roots foyer until November 2nd, 2024. Following November 2nd until the end of the year, it will be possible to arrange a time to view the hearse. We will be pleased to display the hearse again as a focal point in a funerary exhibit coming in early 2025. Talk presenter Amanda Salmon, conservator at the Canadian Conservation Institute, specializes in furniture, wooden objects, and heritage interiors. She holds a BA, Honors BA in Art History and English from Queen's University, as well as diplomas in Collections, Conservation, and Management from Fleming College and Cabinetry Making from Algonquin College of Applied Arts and Technology. She has also worked extensively in the private sector for several museums and institutions across Ontario, including the Ontario Heritage Trust, the Ontario Museum Association, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Amanda is a member of the Canadian Association for Conservation of Cultural Property and the International Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works. And now, welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's great to be here. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining me today as I discuss the conservation of a 1930s horse-drawn winter hearse made in Ontario and belonging to Grey Roots Museum. Like Karen said, my name is Amanda Salmon, and I am a conservator of furniture and wooden objects. And I led the conservation treatment of the Grey Roots winter hearse from about 2018 to 2023 at the Canadian Conservation Institute, which is a federal agency that provides preservation and conservation services to heritage organizations and the museum community in Canada. So like Karen, I want to just first take a moment to acknowledge that I live, work, and raise my children on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and I'm grateful for their custodianship of this land since time immemorial. I also want to thank Grey Roots for inviting me to be part of your virtual lecture series again. So this is really part 2 of a presentation that I gave back in 2021 for the Grey Roots lecture series. And we were still in the middle of the treatment at that time, which was pretty significantly hampered by the pandemic. But in that presentation, I spoke mostly about the object's origins and its function, the results of our initial assessment of the condition of the object, and the proposed treatment. Today, we're going to focus on the treatment itself of this really wonderfully unique object. But in case you missed the first lecture, I'll give you a little bit of very brief background very shortly. But before I get into it, I just want to share with you why I think this was a very interesting project in many ways. The object, the hearse, is what we call a composite object. This is an object that's made of many different materials. It includes wood, paint, metal, glass, textiles, and even leather. As a furniture conservator, I encounter a lot of composite objects, and I draw on a generalist training in several different areas of specialization to inform my work. However, at CCI, we're lucky to have a staff full of heritage material science specialists, so we collaborate together a lot. The treatment involves the expertise of conservation scientists, documentation technologists, engineers and preparators, and wood, metal, and paintings and textiles conservators. So it was also very neat because it was a really collaborative project. And finally, it was particularly interesting because of the many different sort of parameters that we needed to be taken into account when choosing appropriate treatment choices. So, for instance, we needed to obviously reconcile the museum's main objectives for treatment, which were to stabilize the hearse and slow deterioration, and be able to exhibit the object, as well as our own ethical obligations, since conservators are bound by a code of ethics that's guided by a principle of minimal intervention. And at the same time account for other factors such as the significance of the hearse as a once functioning religious ceremonial object with great personal meaning and connections to many community members. And it's also the only Grey County made funerary vehicle known to exist. So, like I said, there was a huge team that worked on this. Usually we acknowledge our collaborators at the end, but I want to put them up front because we had such a great team here. So here they are. So I'll just start by giving you a bit of an overview of what I'll speak about today. First, like I said, I'm going to give you a little bit of brief background. Then, using the condition of the object as sort of a jumping off point, I'll talk about the issues we had to address and the treatments that we undertook to address those issues. And then at the end, I'll just speak a little bit about the sort of after treatment documentation and the return of the object to Grey Roots. So this is a great historical image of the hearse dated 1964, which would have been after the period of active use. It was originally fabricated around 1938 for a gentleman named William Watson of Priceville, who was a local undertaker, and it was perhaps made by Ralph Noble of Noble and Sons, who was a blacksmith and horse-drawn vehicle maker located nearby in Shallow Lake. And it was driven until 1952 by a man named Tommy Curry to service the rural population surrounding the Priceville area before widespread automobile use necessitated plowing the roads in winter in the rural areas. The hearse was eventually obtained by the museum from a gentleman who had acquired it at some point in time and stored the hearse in his barn. And it was during this period that the hearse sort of fell into disrepair. So here is just a little labeled diagram so that you can sort of follow along as I talk about the different parts of the hearse. It's a rectangular enclosed wagon-style hearse with a separate cabin and cargo bed area, and the majority of the body is constructed from solid softwood of an undetermined species, maybe poplar or basswood. And the skis underneath are called the bob runners. That's a very high level description of the object. And it also had the hitching pole associated with it. The hitching pole runs between the horses from the front of the forward bob to the chests of the horses. And with the team harnessed to the pole by means of the traces and pole straps, the hitching pole served as a lever to steer and stop the vehicle. So in terms of function, the hearse was used to transport the undertaker and casket to the place of death and collect the deceased. as well as to deliver the coffin and sometimes the pallbearers to the funeral site. It was pulled by a team of 2 horses hitched to either side of the hitching pole, and the pole was coupled to that front bob runner, like I mentioned, which is equipped with a fitting called a fifth wheel that allows it to pivot and change direction as determined by the course of the horses. The horses were maneuvered with reins that passed through the rein ports above the dashboard of the hearse, where they were manipulated by the driver from within the cabin. So in terms of the main condition issues we had to contend with, you'll see over the next few slides some images of the big ones. First and foremost, we had to contend with a lot of unstable surface coatings with a lot of significant loss of the painted surface. There were upwards of 20 coats of black paint on the exterior of the hearse, and there was also a faux mahogany finish on the interior of the cargo bed, which was in pretty poor condition. We had to deal with a lot of soiling, dirt, pest, and water damage, which was likely incurred during its period of storage in the barn. And there were some structural issues, although it was in pretty good shape structurally. We had some rotten wood, some losses, and previous alterations that had compromised the structure that I spoke about more in depth in the last lecture. There's a lot of missing decoration and hardware, like the carved appliques that are now gone, but whose ghosts you can see in the images, you'll see very shortly. We had a lot of corroded metal to deal with, broken glass in the windscreen, missing glass from the rear viewing windows, and a lot of other little things that we won't have time to touch on today. So this is just an image of the hearse before treatment, showing the proper left-hand side in the front. You see that broken windscreen there. It's hard to tell, but the viewing windows are missing from the rear. You see that paint loss, which sort of shows up as a white, lighter area. That's all just bare wood showing through. And here's the other side of the hearse and the rear doors. So you see there's a significant amount of paint loss there. So in terms of treatment objectives, like I mentioned before, first and foremost, we want to stabilize the structure and slow any deterioration, as well as to harmonize the appearance of the exterior through sort of selective restoration to enhance the interpretive qualities of the object. So I did show this in my last lecture, but this is just a short version of the treatment proposal for the hearse. Conservation treatments are guided by, like I said, amongst many other conditions, our professional code of ethics, which is really centered on conducting minimal intervention and really respecting the integrity of the object. So one way to categorize conservation treatments, interventions is according to intention. So starting with stabilization, you might call these remedial interventions. These are proposed to arrest active deterioration or to stabilize the structure of the object, and we consider them necessary and high priority. Next, you have preventive interventions, and these are intended to lessen the potential for future deterioration or loss, and are usually highly recommended to preserve the object. And finally, we have aesthetic or functional interventions, sometimes called restoration. These kinds of interventions are intended to return the object to a known or assumed state. And this is often done through the addition of non-original material to support interpretation and appreciation. However, these interventions are not required to preserve the object, and so they really have to be weighed very, very carefully. And of course, some of the proposed treatments can fall under multiple categories. So let's get into it here. We'll start with the unstable surface coatings. As I mentioned, the coatings on the Hearse were in pretty rough shape, and there was a lot going on there. There was sort of craquelure or micro cracking all over a lot of the surfaces. This is kind of a network of fine cracks, often caused by things like environmental conditions, or by dissimilar drying rates of successive coatings being put on one after the other. There was a lot of lifting and cupping and flaking of paint, a lot of loss and flaking due to corrosion on the surfaces where the substrate was metal, like the driver side door, the driver and passenger side doors. And a lot of blanching on the bottom right-hand corner. You see a blanched surface where this was one of the topmost painted coatings on the Hearse, and it had kind of gone gray. And so consolidating the paint was the first priority because honestly, if you so much as glanced at the Hearse the wrong way, like the paint would fall off. So there was no way that we could start to undertake other repairs without stabilizing the coatings first. So paint consolidation is a lesson in patience because it takes many dozens of hours to complete this work. And this work was undertaken by two of my collaborators, paintings conservator M.A. Hawker on the left and objects conservator Anne-Marie Guérin on the right. The exterior paint had been consolidated previously, so our adhesive choices were a little limited. I ended up using an acrylic dispersion adhesive called Lascaux Medium for consolidation for the exterior paint layers, and on the interior, Anne-Marie used what's called isinglass. It's a glue made from the swim bladders of sturgeon fish. Canadian sturgeon, to lay down the flaking faux finish on the interior. This process, very time consuming, like I said, it involves first adding usually a little bit of water and alcohol under lifting flakes to sort of break the surface tension with a brush or syringe. And this allows for the adhesive that's then injected or wicked in with a paintbrush afterwards to flow in more easily under the flakes. Then the flakes are softened and laid down, tacked down to the surface with a heated spatula. So here is just an image of the interior faux finish before and after consolidation. On the left-hand side, you can kind of see in raking light there the finish peeling off, and then on the right-hand side, tacked down into place. It may be a little bit hard to interpret, but for us, this is a successful job here. Next condition issue we had to deal with was the soiling and the dirt. Since we risked cross-contamination and things like abrading surfaces if we didn't clean up the soiling next before undertaking additional repairs. So as you can imagine, after being stored in a barn for some time, all of the surfaces of the Hearse were quite dirty. There was a really thick layer of dust on the roof and on other horizontal and difficult to access surfaces. There was also ingrained soiling and staining in various locations on the bare wood surfaces that were no longer protected by the paint. And there was a whole lot of straw and caked mud stuck in the bob runners, especially around that fifth wheel. It's not a great picture on the right, but that shows like all of the straw and dirt trapped under the fifth wheel. And also in between the bob runners and their iron shoes. So on the left there, just a picture of the interior. That's the driver's seat covered with a layer of dust. There was also a lot of dust, sort of unknown deposits of dirt and staining on the carpeted floor panels that were in the bed area, which I'll talk about shortly. And we also had, along with the dirt, a lot of pest contamination. We had evidence of both mammals and insect pests, as well as microorganisms, which had all taken up residence in the Hearse at one time. And we found rodent nesting materials and food stores, insect webbings and casings, and even a few live spiders. I found a wasp nest and residues from a previous white rot infestation caused by water infiltration in the roof cavity. And on the top and bottom right, on the right-hand side of this image, on the top and bottom, are images of what are called flight holes. These are the exit holes of wood-boring beetles that at one point had invested a few of the wooden components of the hearse. I just wanted to show you a close-up of one flight hole, and this is a dead wood-boring beetle larvae who's just sort of died in situ. And the infestation was inactive. However, the boring, like I said, had compromised a few parts, but nothing really critical to the assembly. So to treat all of the dirt, obviously we cleaned it. We cleaned the hearse and all of the surfaces with soft bristled brushes, with HEPA vacuums and smoke sponges, which are used, these sort of squishy sponges used for removing soot residue from objects in the fire restoration industry. And we also use cosmetic sponges, like the ones like for putting your foundation on. And these sponges are blotted along the surface, never dragged, because this could scratch the surface, but you blot them along the surface and it really picks up a surprising amount of dirt. So here's just a couple of pictures of cleaning during treatment. On the left-hand side, this is a component from the undercarriage that was absolutely caked with dirt. It was, you can see the dirt on the left-hand side, and this is the image on the left, the uncleaned portion on the left-hand side and the cleaned portion on the right-hand side. And it was difficult to separate the layers of dirt here from the surface without losing some of the painted surface in the areas where it wasn't very well adhered to the substrate. So this was a very sort of careful task, slow. And on the right-hand side, this is just an image of the floorboards in the cabin, which was a more stable surface. So we were able to introduce a little bit of water on a barely dampened cloth or cotton swab to lift the dirt off here. So on the right-hand image, you see on the left-hand side, the uncleaned portion on the right-hand side has been cleaned. And this is just an image of the front bob runner after we pulled it out from underneath the body. On the left-hand side, the bob runner before cleaning, and on the right-hand side, the front bob runner after cleaning. So you can see how much the dirt was disfiguring the surface, and you really get a sense of the black, the paint after it was cleaned. So next we moved on to cleaning those the textiles that were present on the hearse, and my colleague Anne-Marie Guérin, again, she conducted the textile cleaning, and she used dry methods like we always start with a brush and HEPA vacuum. She used some dental tools to kind of pick out some crusted dirt, and then she used wet methods as well. In fact, she ended up using, you see on the right here, a Bissell carpet cleaner after a lot of careful testing to make sure that it wouldn't damage the fibers or the plywood panels upon which they were mounted. So it was very important that we didn't drive any water down into those plywood panels. She ended up using pure water because after a lot of sort of comparative testing, she didn't really find a significant difference in the sort of efficacy of the cleaning of the wash water with or without detergent. So I just want to show you this next image here is some of her wash water. And this is, you know, what conservators, this is a satisfying part of the job, right? So on the left, this is the first, you know, water she sucked out of these carpeted panels, and then she rinsed, you know, successively. To the right are her rinse waters to ending up with a clear rinse and knowing that, you know, she had gotten most of the dirt out of those panels. Just an image of those carpeted, one section of the carpeted floor panels before and after, before on the left, before cleaning, and on the right, after cleaning. So you can see the deposits are gone. And then this is an image of those floor panels installed in the hearse. So on the left, before cleaning, and on the right, after cleaning. She did an excellent job. So another condition issue that we had to address was the soiled and frayed cabin floor covering. This was like a painted cloth floor covering. Not a great picture. I apologize, but this is sort of the state of affairs of the floor covering when we encountered it. So quite dirty and torn and frayed. We were able to clean it using, again, cotton swabs or cotton cloths barely dampened with water to clean the dirt from the surface. I know this is not a super great image, but my colleague, furniture conservator Anne-Stephanie Etienne, and I used non-woven polyester fabric fused with an adhesive called Biva 371 to back the fraying edges of that. And in this image, you see the edge of that oilcloth. And so we used the Biva and polyester fabric to back the edges of the oilcloth covering, and then we put Japanese paper toned with acrylic on the top to sort of further tack down the edge and fill in losses. And render the floor covering less likely to tear and fray in the future. Another condition issue we addressed were the corroded metal elements on the hearse. There were many of them, a lot of iron surfaces with some loose corrosion, sometimes spalling off, though much of the corrosion was stable. So the loose iron corrosion was removed with fine steel wool in some cases, and in some areas with a wire wheel accessory on a rotary tool like a Dremel. And in areas where the metal surface was stable, the surface was cleaned with odorless mineral spirits. After we cleaned all the metal, we addressed the rotten wood that was present on the hearse. So there was some rotten wood in the cornice at the front of the proper right side of the hearse that had resulted in the loss of several feet of the cornice cap in that area. And we tested several types of consolidants, and we weighed factors like the strength of the adhesive, its ability to be reversed, and the potential for staining. So we ended up using a conservation favorite adhesive called B72 to consolidate most of the rotten wood. And this was the adhesive in varying concentrations, thin concentrations, was injected and brushed onto the crumbling areas to return some strength. So on the left-hand image here, you just see our testing of different consolidants, and on the right, it's hard to tell, but this section has been consolidated. In this one area where I needed to later rebuild the cornice, I had to retreat with some Abitron wood epoxy in this area in order to return enough structural integrity to this area to be able to glue back the cornice to it. One of the main issues that we had to address was the inadequate support for the body over the undercarriage. So in the last lecture, I talked a lot about the previous alterations that were done to the hearse, which to the hearse body, which resulted in an expansion in height, width, and length. So when the body was expanded in width, new materials were added underneath the body to ensure it was purchased on the bob runners. So these planks of wood have been added to transfer the load of the body to the undercarriage. But the contact point was really minimal. You can see it on the left there in the top circle. There's really only about an inch of purchase of the body onto the undercarriage. And so cracking had resulted in those members because there was just a lot of force on one edge there. And this had really created some instability in the whole assembly. And then to compound this issue, the proper left side of the rear bob runner was not actually attached. The bolt was detached, so the gearing was not actually fully attached to the body. So the treatment for this was to jack up the hearse, which allowed us to remove the undercarriage, which really facilitated cleaning and repair of those bob runners as well. So we jacked up the hearse, we removed the bob runners, and we added new oak beams, which you can see on the right-hand side of this image here, and those were bolted alongside the original summers. Those are the longitudinal members that run underneath the body. And this helped to distribute the load more evenly on the bob runners. So there you see, this is just, like I said, an image on the left after we jacked up the hearse, and then on the right, you can see some of those oak beams attached alongside the original summers. This portion for me was probably the most stressful part of the project. The hardboard ceiling panels in the interior of the cargo bed were in really poor shape. They were warped. You can't see it in this image, but they really hung down a lot, and they were distorted and soiled, highly soiled, and very stained, like you can see here. This had been caused by a permeable roof, which even the Hearse's roof had once likely had a waterproof covering, but it had been lost at some point. So water infiltration had caused pretty catastrophic damage to these panels. And as well, on the top side, you couldn't see in the roof cavity, there had been a lot of pest activity, and so they were fairly contaminated on the top side. So the decision was made, and it was a difficult decision to make, but it was made in consultation with the curator to remove and replace these panels. These panels were likely covered by some other finishing treatment, like draped fabric, and they probably wouldn't have been seen in the first place. So this is an image on the left of me replacing the hardboard ceiling. So I used these, an old trick, these are called go bars. They're essentially just flexed strips of wood that you sort of wedge, you fit the ceiling into place, and which meant I didn't need to have other people in there helping me to hold the ceiling up in place. And then I nailed it as per the original attachment method and the nailing pattern. So this is just an image of the replacement of the hardboard ceiling on the left-hand side before removal, and on the right-hand side after replacing that the hardboard ceiling with new hardboard. After the replacement of the ceiling, we moved on to a lot of little breaks and a lot of different wooden parts. This shows the front bob runner before treatment. You can see there's a slice of the top, I think it's called the rave, missing, and there was a big crack in the center of it. On the right-hand side is that crack being glued up, and you'll see in this picture and many others that I really do adhere to that adage of you can never have too many clamps. You'll see we like to make sure things are in the exact right position when we glue them. Here's another break. I showed it to you earlier, that crack in the auxiliary summer, and on the right-hand side, that's it being glued up. And I should say for most of the repairs to the wooden components, we used usually fish glue. This is an animal glue that we really favor in furniture conservation, and we like it because it's easy to use and highly reversible. And after doing repairing a lot of those little breaks, we moved on to other damaged wooden elements, particularly the decorative wooden elements, and decorative and non-structural issues. So one issue were the warped appliques that were present on the hearse. And these, they were mostly carved drapery panels. And these had cupped so that the edges were left unsupported. And you can see that on the left-hand side there. So these are at risk of detaching because they can be accidentally caught and pulled. But rather than trying to straighten these boards, which is really pretty difficult, the lifting elements, it was decided to support them in place, and we used balsa shims. And this is that soft model making wood, and we use it. It's great for fills in conservation because it's really compressible. You can squish it with your fingers like a rigid foam. So it will accommodate movement of the wood in response to fluctuations in relative humidity, because this will move. The wood on the hearse will continue to move in response to its environment. So if these panels move again, the theory is that they'll squish the weaker balsa rather than being damaged themselves if I had used a harder fill material like oak, say. We had a lot of detached decoration that luckily had been retained, and so these were reattached to the hearse. This is just one instance of the the fringe of a drapery panel, again reattached using fish glue. And there's another detached decorative block that originated from the rear door. Again, you can never have too many clamps, so this is just in during treatment when those pieces were being reattached. And then we did have to replace a lot of missing elements, though this was done selectively, and it had to be done where the form could really readily be determined, and where the original form could be determined, and where these elements were really required to support other existing elements. So these little bits and bobs, they're called, well, my instructor used to refer to them as relishes. These are the little bits of carvings that are made, when carvings are made from laminated blocks, a bunch of blocks glued together. These are the little side elements, and they frequently get detached or lost. So you can see the whiter wood pieces here are elements that I remade and reattached to the hearse before they were colored to match the surrounding area. This is missing relish from the one of the column capitals. On the left-hand side, it's hard to see, but it's actually a loss. The relish is missing. In the middle, I've scarfed a piece of wood back on and carved it to fit. And then on the right-hand side of this image, you see that piece toned, but before coating. And here's another missing relish from a drapery panel. This was on the proper right-hand side. So you see on the left that gap there where the relish was missing. And during treatment, that's the image in the middle where I added a piece of wood and carved it to match. And then after treatment, you see it's been toned to match the surrounding area. And here's just another example of missing component, the little tassels on the damaged tassels that on the curtain tiebacks, just missing a little portion there, which was replaced and toned. And then we moved on to reproducing the missing portion of the cornice. This for me was probably one of the most fun portions of the treatment, and that filling the losses in the cornice cap. I used this really cool technique that was taught to me by my colleague in the furniture lab, and Stephanie Etienne, and it's used when you're faced with having to fill a loss that has really irregular margins in wood. So in traditional furniture and millwork restoration, you just kind of cut off that ratty edge to create a flat square edge in order to scarf new material to it and have a nice solid joint. But we try, as I said before, to avoid removing original material as much as possible. And this was my first time using this technique, so it was a great opportunity to practice. So the image on the left shows the loss. And then in the middle, you see this method for filling these irregular losses. And these are very thin sticks of balsa, again, which, like I said earlier, because the material is quite squishy, it can be sort of gently pressed to conform to irregular loss margins. So it's many little sticks, and they allow you to bring the stick, the ends of the sticks, right up close to an irregular edge, and you get this really good resolution. You know, it's sort of like pixels, basically. And so that allows for a nice, you to build a nice margin around your fill. And then those are laminated together again with fish glue. So once I had all of this bundle of sticks laminated together, it was flattened and it was trimmed, like you see on the right-hand side there. And now you can veneer over this surface, you know, because you are stuck with a lot of little joints. And so you can veneer over it. In the interest of time, I skim coated the top of it with an acrylic spackle, smoothed it, and painted it to match the original material, the original color of the paint. So this is just another image of this repair during treatment. I had to add a glue block on the inside of the cornice to allow the cornice molding had sprung away from the body in this area. So I needed to add a glue block to have enough gluing surface to be able to reattach the cornice in place. So that's what you see on the right-hand side, that glue block being glued into place. This is an image of the repair before coloring, but with a new portion of the cornice cap that I fabricated in place. And this is an image, I wish I had an image of the top, but this is an image from the side of that cornice cap replaced. And from the front as well, you see on the left-hand side, before treatment, the piece is missing, and the existing cornice molding is pulling away from the body. And on the right, after treatment with the cornice, a new cornice cap portion reinstalled, and the cornice reattached to the side of the body. Following all of these sort of major structural repairs, of course, I didn't mention, but we did place the hearse back down onto the undercarriage, and then we moved on to replacing the broken glass and missing glass. So there was a broken pane of glass in the front windscreen, and there was missing glazing in the rear viewing windows. So we replaced these with museum grade acrylic, just to provide like a shatterproof solution. We really didn't want just in case of any accidents, for the, glass to break and fall into the hearse and damage the hearse any further. So after all of the missing portions or selective portions were replaced, we moved on to the final issue, which was contending with all of the losses in the painted surface. And so the choice of whether or not to in-paint the hearse was what we hummed and hawed about since the beginning, since it arrived. At first we thought, no way can we repaint this. There's so much loss. But after some testing and a lot of thinking and consultation with the curator, it was finally decided that discontinuous painted surface was so distracting that it was really interfering with the interpretation of the object and detracting from it, frankly, as from its value as a sacred and ceremonial object. So we used shellac actually to seal the exposed bare wood, and this was helpful too because that wood is the bare wood with no coating was really susceptible to ingrained dirt and dust. So we sealed it, and that helped to kind of saturate it and bring it closer to the surrounding black surfaces. And then we toned a lot of the losses with just black watercolor to match the existing black paint. This was, again, my colleague Anne-Marie Garin. She deserves credit. She did most of the in-painting on the exterior, and she did an excellent job. And we're really happy with the result. It's not a full recoating where we go over top of the existing paint, but it works really well to reintegrate the surface. So here is an image of the hearse before in-painting on the left and after in-painting on the right. So you see it's really returned a sort of homogeneous look to the exterior. And here's another image of the left, on the left of the hearse, the rear of the hearse before in-painting, and then on the right-hand side after in-painting. So we're really pleased with the way the in-painting turned out. So once treatment was essentially complete, we always do after treatment photography. I can't remember if I spoke about this one in the first lecture, but the before treatment, the photography for the hearse in general was quite a challenge because it didn't fit in our photo studio at CCI. So we actually had to set up a temporary photo studio in the back hallway at CCI. And this is an image of our photographer, Mylène Chaquette, who was incredible. Without her, we wouldn't have any of these fabulous photos of the hearse. She worked for 3 days to shoot the hearse in our back hallway, and she's shooting here, has all of her gear set up in our spray booth so we could get the right depth of the shot. And so that was quite an undertaking, which involved a big team to help us rotate the hearse and put it into position and get all the shots that we needed. Actually, CCI has just produced a really cool video that we'll share later about the photography, the after photography photo shoot for the hearse. So once photography is complete, we get to pack it up, and so this is an image of the crating and protective wrapping that we created for the pole, the hitching pole on the left. Does seem, like maybe a little bit of overkill on the left, but you put a lot of time and effort into conserving these pieces, and you really want to make sure that they're protected well when they're transported back. And so that's an image on the left of the hitching pole in its crate before the lid went on. And on the right-hand side is the hearse completely wrapped with plastic wrap with protective foam covering on all of the protruding edges. And this is just an image of our team, building services team, loading up the hearse into the truck. And we said farewell to it here. And I just wanted to sort of finish by showing some of my team members. These were especially the team members involved in helping us do that photo shoot and manipulate the hearse and move it into position. So on behalf of our team and CCI, I really want to thank Grey Roots Museum for the opportunity to be involved in this really fun project and for inviting me to be a part of your virtual lecture series. So thanks very much for listening, and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Amanda. I was just curious, you talked about working with many other specialists, and the last talk, the window was broken, and you talked about having to consult with a glass specialist. I just wondered what specialties you had to draw on most for working on the hearse.
So I mentioned before that actually lifting and separating the body from the undercarriage was most stressful for me as a furniture conservator. I deal with large objects, but not usually industrial objects like this. So I consulted. We're really lucky in Ottawa to have access to a lot of expertise in the area. So I was able to consult with some of the guys over at the Museum of the Air and Space Museum. And they move heavy, big, oversized objects all the time. And they helped me to sort of understand the steps and the risks and the right equipment to use to jack up that hearse and separate the undercarriage. So they were a great help to me. I also leaned on, at CCI, we have an engineer on staff, Paul Marcon, who also helped me in this regard to make sure that we lifted the hearse very carefully. Like I said, the paintings conservators were instrumental here for helping us to determine how we were going to consolidate all of those flaking paint layers and then go about doing the retouching. In terms of the glass, we that's right. Somebody had asked in the first lecture, like, can you just repair that broken glass? And this is where, I say we're frequently weighing the parameters and all of the different conditions. We could have tried to repair that glass, and in fact, we did. And the results were just so distracting that it was felt that just to do a full replacement was better. And so, yeah, I didn't mention at all the analysis that was undertaken, but our conservation scientists, I think I mentioned it in the first lecture, did a lot of analysis on the paint layers, which really informed how we would treat them, what adhesives we would use to consolidate them. So just a ton of people, like I said, helped out. And then like I said, our building services team, the muscle, because it's such a big object, they helped us manipulate it, and they were fabulous too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that kind of leads me to the next question. I guess the size was a challenge, especially like taking pictures like you mentioned. I just wondered if there was any other surprises along the way. I think in the first talk you talked about the raccoon that had lived in it for a while, but just as the project went on, were there any other surprises?
Not too many with this one. We were all wondering what was going to be in that roof cavity when we opened it up, because I think I mentioned in the first lecture that we used a borescope, which is like a teeny little endoscopic camera, shoved it in a hole to see what was going on in there. And like I did say, there was a lot of pest debris. And so when I finally did remove that ceiling and the interior, yes, I found, surprises, some white rot. Like I said, it was inactive and it was easy to clean and deactivate. That wasp nest was there. I mentioned a lot of live spiders when it first came in, but they sort of crawled away eventually. But no, I mean, it was very interesting when you start to get into these projects, into pieces of furniture and big wooden assemblies, to see the way things are made, the way they were put together. You get to see the guts, So we were able to see the maker's marks. I think I spoke about that in the first lecture as well. Using infrared, we could see infrared photography. We could see the maker's marks on the hitching pole. I could see a lot of pencil marks on the interior of the cargo bed, where the maker had numbered the boards to put them into place, and those little sorts of bits of information. I also talked in the first lecture about all of those alterations that were made. So it's neat to see when you get into, disassembling these pieces, to see how it was originally constructed, where there's evidence of different joinery that was modified, and you start to sort of piece together a story of how the piece was altered and what maybe the intention was. Like I said, really with this hearse, it was to make it bigger. And so it was interesting just to see the way it had evolved over time, like that. Yeah. there's always surprises, and that's the part of the fun part of the job. The other thing that was really neat was the faux finish on the interior, which if you looked at it, you could barely even sort of distinguish it when it first came in, but through analysis and through removal of some pieces which had protected the faux finish in some areas, you started to get a better sense of what it would have looked like, because we did have some testimonials from some community members who had used to play in the back of the hearse as children, who had talked about when it was in that barn, when it was in its state of when it was not being used. And they talked about a beautiful mahogany interior, which we didn't see when it first arrived, but then we could see what they meant, because it was actually this faux finish that we got a better sense of once the flaking paint was consolidated, and we could see, like I said, some areas that had been hidden, and you could really see what the gloss would have looked like. And so those kinds of things are always very, very neat to discover.
Yeah, and even though jacking it up was stressful, it did really show what it was like underneath. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it allowed for way more access because we were joking that we would have to hire a very small intern to help us get underneath and do the cleaning with the bob runners in situ. So once we were able to lift it up and pull those bob runners out, it was so much easier to clean and treat the undercarriage.
And just because I can't resist, and probably some people watching are interested too, I just wondered if you had any furniture care tips for someone for pieces that are maybe in a place that doesn't have air conditioning. So I know, like, you always want to control the temperature and humidity, but would there be any other things someone could do to take good care up there?
Well, like the research and the sort of thinking has sort of evolved over time on environmental guidelines for museum objects. And so, it used to be that we really prescribed a very strict set of parameters and environmental conditions for objects. We really preferred 50% relative humidity and, a temperature between 19 and 21 degrees, really ideal conditions. But not only are those conditions very difficult for many people and institutions to maintain, it turns out it's really not necessary for a lot of objects. Any object that's been exposed to big fluctuations in environmental fluctuations becomes, the term is proofed to those. It's already experienced the movement that it will have experienced, the wood movement, if we're talking about wood, at that high level of relative humidity, and it's experienced the damage there. So it's proofed to that, and it really, even if it's exposed to that environment again, you're not likely to see damage again. So we've kind of relaxed our guidelines in that regard. In terms of what you have around your house and your family heirlooms and things, I mean, there are. I think I mentioned before that one of the biggest risks for furniture are physical forces. And this is where you see damage happen quickly and catastrophically sometimes. And so I think it's really most important to really think about the way you're moving your furniture and you're moving around your furniture in your house, how you're handling it. I think I mentioned last time, if you're vacuuming, trying not to slam your vacuum up into the legs of all of your furniture. And when you're lifting, you're lifting objects and moving furniture and moving it around, make sure you're lifting from the lowest point on the object, and not, say from a top where you can pop the top off. So if you're carrying a table, you're carrying it underneath the apron or by the legs. If you're moving, your grandmother's chair around, you want to lift from underneath the seat frame rather than by the crust rail, the rail on top. So it really, I think, being careful to handle your furniture, being careful when you handle your furniture is probably a really good advice for preserving it.
I just want to thank you so much for all the time you took to make both presentations and all your careful work on the project and all your colleagues as well. It's very, very much appreciated. Thanks so much.
Our absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.